Eating a carnivore diet led to full resolution of my autoimmune condition, eczema, itchy rashes, and asthma that I'd had for my whole life. But after a year and a half, I quit the carnivore diet.
Hello, Corey here. In this video, I want to explain to you why I am no longer carnivore.
I quit the carnivore diet.
I didn't have the energy. I didn't have my libido. My stress shield was kind of disappearing.
I just can't do it anymore for several reasons. Number one, just some practical stuff, but also some more serious reasons that could impact my health.
My blood work showed that my ferritin levels were elevated, and my copper was a little bit on the lower end, and my thyroid, while my thyroid numbers were still in range, my thyroid still wasn't as optimal as it could be.
I did straight carnivore for the first few days, but it's hard.
You know, the more I think about it, the more I think that the carnivore diet is like a cult.
In recent times, even some of the most well-known carnivore influencers have quit the carnivore diet. So in this video, we're going to look at what's really going on and answer the question, why is everyone quitting the carnivore diet? Let's get into it.
After about a year to a year and a half of a carnivore diet, I began to notice issues, probably in my case arising due to electrolyte insufficiency. This led to muscle cramps. I had problems with sleep. I had heart palpitations, fluttering of my heart. I had something called hypnagogic jerks where I would fall asleep but jerk myself awake. I had declining lab values that were important to me, specifically lower total testosterone, higher sex hormone binding globulin, which leads to a lower free testosterone. And I had the sense that I was cold or a little bit cold all the time. And when I looked at my labs, my thyroid levels, specifically my total T3 and free T3, were not ideal.
Paul blames these issues on the carnivore diet, but I believe they weren't caused by the diet itself. Instead, they were caused by three other factors. Firstly, Paul is a very lean guy. I mean, you can simply look at the bloke. He's got abs, his veins are popping out. Paul clearly has a very low body fat percentage. And on top of that, he surfs for hours every day. He lifts, he walks a lot. When you're that lean, you don't have much body fat to pull energy from. People who carry more fat can get away with eating less because they've got plenty of stored fuel. But Paul, he doesn't have that buffer. So if you're training as much and as hard as Paul does, and you're not eating enough, especially not eating enough fat, your body doesn't have much to run on. And that's when you're going to start feeling terrible and experiencing many of these symptoms that Paul talks about. This also explains why he felt very cold. Heating your body up is a very metabolically expensive process, which means it takes a lot of energy to do this. So when you're lean and not eating much, your body will actually reduce its internal temperature in order to burn less total energy. So this was Paul's first issue. He was super lean and he was undereating. Another major issue Paul ran into simply came down to insufficient insulin. When you eat carbs, your blood sugar spikes, and a hormone called insulin elevates to bring that blood sugar back down. But insulin does more than just regulate blood sugar. It also helps your kidneys hold on to electrolytes like sodium and potassium. On carnivore, because you're not consuming many carbohydrates, obviously the main driver of insulin isn't carbs. Instead, it's protein. When you eat a meal with protein, some of that protein is converted into glucose, which is sugar. That small rise in blood sugar right there is enough to trigger an insulin response. And that insulin is what helps you retain electrolytes. But here's the problem. If you're not eating enough protein, or you are eating enough protein, but you're eating it in lots of small little meals spread out across the day, instead of having bigger, larger ones, your insulin may never rise enough to do this job of holding on to electrolytes. Without that signal, your kidneys may not retain electrolytes properly. That's when you start getting the exact symptoms that Paul described. Cramps, heart palpitations, poor recovery, and bad sleep. When you watch one of Paul's full day of eating videos, what you see is him having lots of meals spread out across the day. And none of these meals are particularly large. So this right here is another contributing factor in regards to Paul's issues. He wasn't eating enough protein in proper meals to trigger enough insulin and therefore keep his electrolytes balanced. The final problem with Paul's version of carnivore was that he was incorporating a lot of organ meats, in particular liver. Paul owns a supplement company that sells organ supplements including liver. On top of that, he was also regularly eating raw liver and other organs in their natural form. Now, liver is incredibly nutrient dense. It's the most nutrient dense food on the planet. But here's the thing, liver is actually too high in certain nutrients. For example, copper, as well as vitamin A. And with vitamin A, unlike many other nutrients, which you just flush out if you consume too much of, vitamin A is actually fat soluble, which means it gets stored in your liver and then builds up over time. When vitamin A levels get too high, it can start affecting your liver and kidneys' ability to keep electrolytes balanced. All of Paul's symptoms to do with electrolyte issues are also classic symptoms of vitamin A toxicity. So this right here was Paul's third issue. He was eating too much liver, which potentially led to vitamin A toxicity. When you look at it all together, Paul's issues weren't caused by the carnivore diet itself. The electrolyte issues, low testosterone, the suppressed thyroid issues, being cold, all of these things could have been resolved if Paul did these three things. If Paul would have just eaten more food overall, as well as larger meals and cut back on the liver, he would have avoided all of the issues he talked about, but instead he just quit and blamed the carnivore diet.
This is the number one factor why I stopped doing the carnivore diet. I simply couldn't eat enough fats and proteins to get myself out of that chronically dieted state where I was sub 6% body fat for multiple years. Now this is individual, but eating so much protein was too satiating for me, and adding in more fats into my diet would have caused digestive issues, especially if it was in the form of rendered fats like tallow or anything of that sort.
This right here is one of the most interesting examples of someone quitting the carnivore diet. Because, I mean, in a way, he quit because carnivore was too successful. Not being able to eat enough food to get above 6% body fat, which is basically a stage-ready professional bodybuilder, is a very rare problem to have. Most people are struggling to lose fat, not to put it back on. But, I mean, in all seriousness, the issue of losing too much weight can be a real problem for some people on carnivore. The reason for this is because carnivore is extremely satiating. When all you're eating is meat and animal products, your appetite stays very low. Now there are many reasons for this. One is because protein and fat trigger many of your strong satiety hormones. Another reason is because animal products are extremely nutrient dense, meaning your body gets what it needs very fast and doesn't keep you to push eating more in search of these missing nutrients. You also avoid carbohydrates, which mess with your blood sugar levels and hunger hormones. As a result of all of these reasons, some people find that on carnivore they get full very fast. Like Paul's example, when you're too lean and not eating enough, you can run into issues with energy, sleep, electrolytes, and even your hormones. In that video, Tristan said he couldn't physically eat more, but usually there are a couple of ways around this. For one, perhaps the easiest thing to do is to increase your consumption of dairy. Dairy is much more palatable than animal products like meat, so adding things in like cream, cheese, or even yogurt can make it so much easier to get more food in and as a whole increase your overall energy intake. Another option is to mix up the types of animal food you're eating. Some people find they can eat much more when it's from, say, fatty fish, while others find they can eat more when it's high-fat ground beef. By rotating different options, you'll often find certain foods your taste buds and body want more, which makes it possible to get more total food. Tristan also said that when he tried to increase his fat intake, it would cause him digestive issues. The main fix to this would have been to simply increase his fat intake, but to do it a lot slower. The reason for this is because for fat to be absorbed, it requires a digestive fluid called bile. The thing with bile, however, is that it is demand driven, meaning your body only produces as much as required. So if you drastically increase your fat intake, it can take a while for your bile production to also increase. As a result, this excess fat passes through and results in loose stools. But if you instead increase your fat intake much slower and more gradually, you never have this major gap between bile production and fat intake, and therefore you won't get loose stools. With just a few small adjustments, I'm confident Tristan could have solved this problem of not eating enough and actually gain weight on carnivore. I also do think, however, that part of his decision to quit was influenced by other bodybuilders who believe that carbs are essential for optimal bodybuilding. But I mean, that too is debatable.
I mixed in a little fruit. I eat fruit because I find when I don't do that, and I did straight carnivore for the first few days, I think like the first 8 or 9 days, but it was, it's hard. I was slogging through workouts.
Just no energy?
Yeah.
The reason Joe's performance dropped on carnivore, and therefore why he ended up quitting, is very easily explained. Joe simply wasn't fat adapted. What this means is that on a standard high carbohydrate diet, your body runs on carbohydrates for energy. Now these carbs break down to glucose, which is stored in your muscles as glycogen. This is the fuel source your muscles primarily use. But when you remove carbs like on carnivore, your body has to learn to run on fat instead and create its muscle glycogen from fat. This process right here is called fat adaptation, and it takes a while to become fat adapted. For most people, it takes less than a few weeks to become somewhat fat adapted, which is where you start to feel super energized, you feel good. But for full fat adaptation, where muscle glycogen replenishment is optimal, it can take months. Joe only did a strict carnivore diet for about a week before he added fruit. This right here is nowhere near enough time for the body to fully adapt. During this early phase when you first start carnivore, your glycogen levels drop, which is why some people often feel sluggish or weaker in the gym. But if you push through, your body becomes much more efficient at creating this glycogen on its own. This is where a lot of confusion comes in. People point to studies showing athletes perform better on high carbohydrate diets in comparison to high fat diets. And then they go around saying, well, the science clearly shows you need carbohydrates for optimal performance. But here's the thing, in these studies, they test athletes who have only been on a high fat diet for a short period of time. So of course their performance isn't as good. They aren't properly fat adapted. However, when you actually look at athletes who have been low carb for a long time and are therefore fat adapted, the results are very different. Fat adapted athletes perform just as well, and in some cases even better than carb based athletes. For example, this study here found that fat adapted athletes had identical glycogen replenishment compared to carb based athletes, despite the fact they were eating no carbohydrates. That's the important point. On carnivore or low carb diets, your body is able to produce its own glycogen and maintain a stable blood sugar naturally. You don't need to be constantly munching down those sugar gels or whatever other carbohydrates people eat in order to perform your best. This right here is exactly why so many top athletes like Muhammad Salah, LeBron James, many UFC fighters, and even entire sports teams like the Penrith Panthers who switched to low carb and carnivore diets. If Joe had have just stayed carnivore for longer, his body would have adapted. His energy would have come back up. His gym performance would have gone up. And as a whole, his problems would have gone away.
When I first started on YouTube, I was eating a carnivore-ish diet. I realized I was under eating, and when I just eat tons of meat and fat, I can't eat enough. And so I found that if I have a little bit of carbohydrate, it actually stimulates me to keep eating and to not under eat.
Lily's situation is actually very similar to Tristan's, where she simply just couldn't eat enough. As both Lily and Tristan experienced, when you add carbs, these problems go away. It's very easy to eat more carbs for a number of reasons, one of which is because your blood sugar spikes, and when this blood sugar inevitably drops again, hunger kicks back in massively, and as a result, you can eat a lot more. On carnivore, fat and protein keep your blood sugar relatively steady, which helps you stay full for much longer. As well as this, carbs are also more palatable. Even if you're completely full from a massive steak, you can very easily eat a bit more fruit, bread, or something sweeter if that's in front of you.
So as of August 2021, I started incorporating a serving of fruit, which not only helped me from under eating, but also improved my sleep, as I started noticing when I was doing more strict carnivore that I was waking up like 2 hours before my alarm would go off. I also started having more eye twitching from not holding on to my electrolytes, and I was also noticing my performance in the gym was getting slowly not as optimal, and when I incorporated a little bit more carbohydrates, I was able to push it more in the gym and have more strength.
Lily too is very lean and in great shape, but like Paul, because she was generally under eating and likely not getting in enough protein in one sitting, her insulin levels were probably too low to properly retain key electrolytes. This right here explains her symptoms like poor sleep and eye twitching. And when you're that lean and under eating, your gym performance and endurance are also going to drop as well. This is why when she added fruit and other carbs back in, she essentially killed two birds with one stone. For one, the carbs sufficiently increased her appetite, allowing her to eat more, and therefore she had better energy. And two, the carbs increased her insulin levels, which allowed her to maintain more of those electrolytes. If Lily had have stayed on carnivore, the fix to her under eating would have been the same as Tristan's: more dairy and potentially a bit more variety. And to fix her electrolyte problem, simply more protein in singular meals, and she could have added more salt to her meals, because 90% of the time, people on carnivore who have electrolyte issues are typically people with sodium issues.
So essentially from August 2021 to August 2023, I had mainly just been eating meat, fish, dairy, and a piece of fruit. Keep in mind, this whole time my scalp has still been itchy, and because it's itchy, then when I scratch it, things will flake off. So now it's more like dandruff, and then when it's more dandruffy, then it stresses me out, and then I have more like psoriasis or kind of like dermatitis. So that's kind of where my scalp was at this point, and I got my blood work done August 2023. My blood work showed that my ferritin levels were elevated, which ferritin is the storage form of iron, so slightly high in iron, and my copper was a little bit on the lower end, and my thyroid, while my thyroid numbers were still in range, my thyroid still wasn't as optimal as it could be. And having dry skin can be a sign that someone has maybe some thyroid issues going on.
When it comes to lab work, it's easy to see one marker on paper and panic because it's, quote, too high or too low. But the real question is, according to what? Most people don't realize that lab ranges aren't based on an objective measure of optimal health. They're based on population averages. And the population we're looking at is one which is largely eating the standard American diet, often with chronic inflammation and metabolic issues. What researchers do to calculate these optimal ranges is simply take the middle of these numbers and call it normal. But normal for an unhealthy population doesn't mean that it's good for you. High ferritin or iron is a good example of this. And iron deficiency is one of the most common nutrient deficiencies in the world. Most people eating a standard diet consume very low amounts of iron, or they have poor iron absorption because it's from plant-based sources. As a result, the lab ranges of iron aren't exactly the best guideline. In meat, you get a form of iron called heme iron, which your body absorbs and stores much more effectively. Now, ferritin is a measurement of how much iron you have stored in your body. So instead of meaning iron overload, slightly high ferritin levels can simply mean your body is absorbing and using a healthy amount of iron. And regarding the thyroid, if it was actually low, that can be explained by not eating enough. A possible explanation of Lily's scalp issues could be the dairy that she was consuming. A lot of store-bought dairy is put through a process called pasteurization, which is where it is heated to high temperatures in order to stay shelf-stable for longer. However, this process can damage the proteins in dairy, as they are very sensitive to heat, which for some people can trigger allergy-like responses such as a rash. Now in this video, we've looked at why I believe these people ran into issues on carnivore and what they could do to fix them. But there is still one common trend amongst all of these people. They're still on very meat-heavy and meat-based diets that some people would still consider carnivore. So while a lot of people like to go around trying to disprove the carnivore diet, saying, look at all these people over here, they had to quit. In reality, they didn't exactly quit. By the true definition of the word carnivore, they are still technically carnivore, if not very close to. At the end of the day, no matter what your diet is, meat and animal products are the foods that are most essential for human health. And in this video here, I break down exactly why it's so important for all humans to eat a meat-based carnivorous diet. Anyway, as always, great speaking with you, and I'll see you next time.